Introduction. The Bell Witch did not whisper. She ruined a family, marked a death, and vanished with secrets that still bleed into the night. How could an unseen force bind a household, bruise skin, mimic voices, and choose a single man for silence? In the next minutes, you will hear what the bells endured, the evidence that terrified a town, and the secret that might explain why a spirit kept its hunger. John Bell first noticed the silence before he noticed the fear. On a late autumn evening in rural Tennessee, as the sun drowned behind the fields, the farm seemed to pause. No wind through the corn, no horses snorting in their stalls. John tried to ignore it, but something in that stillness pressed against him, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The bells assumed it was an animal, or perhaps a local boy playing a cruel joke. Yet the noises returned every night, shifting positions, growing bolder, more confident. When John stepped outside with his lantern, the sounds stopped instantly, leaving only the glow of fireflies and the wide darkness of the fields. They found nothing. No tracks in the soil, no broken branches, no sign of trespass. Still, the disturbances continued, always after sunset, always surrounding the house like a ritual. Then the voices began. At first, they were faint, like a distant conversation carried by a shifting wind, murmured words impossible to decipher. The bells strained to hear, pressing their ears against the wooden walls, trying to determine if the whispers came from outside or inside. But the voices drifted, changing positions from corner to corner, room to room, as though something unseen was pacing through their home. John tried to reassure them, but his words shook with doubt. How could he explain what he could not understand? Soon after, objects began to move. A chair dragged across the floor by an invisible force. A bowl levitating just long enough for the family to freeze in horror before it dropped and shattered. The bells on the horses' harnesses jingled inside the locked barn, even when no animals were near them. Neighbors who visited witnessed the same terrors, leaving quickly, refusing to step foot on the property again. The attacks escalated when the force turned its attention to John's youngest daughter, Betsy. She woke screaming, claiming something had pulled her hair. The entity slapped her, pinched her, whispered into her ear at night with a cruel intimacy. Betsy cried that the voice belonged to a woman, a shrill, angry woman who cursed her name. Rumors spread across the countryside, twisting the quiet town into a place of suspicion and dread. Locals whispered that the bells had been cursed, but no one, not even the most educated men in the region, could deny the events. Too many had heard the voices. Too many had seen the objects move. Something was there, something intelligent, malicious, and frighteningly patient. John Bell prayed for answers, but each night the terror grew. And among the many voices the entity used, one phrase emerged with chilling clarity, spoken in a tone dripping with hatred. "I will kill John Bell." But the nights were long, and the fear was longer. The unseen presence no longer scratched at walls or rattled dishes at random. It behaved as if it were studying them, learning their fears, choosing its moments with a precision that felt chillingly human. Sometimes like an old man, other times like a child giggling where no child stood. But despite the shifting voices, one thing remained constant. It knew things. It knew prayers before the family spoke them. It recited full passages from the local pastor's sermons, word for word. And one night, as Lucy Bell wept beside her exhausted daughter, a hymn no one outside her family could possibly know, many left pale, trembling, unable to explain what they had seen. A group of curious men spent a night at the Bell home, determined to expose the haunting as a hoax. But when their blankets were ripped away and their lanterns smashed by unseen hands, they fled before dawn, refusing to ever return. Word spread quickly. What had started as a private torment was fast becoming a public spectacle. But the one explanation people whispered most often was the simplest and the most terrifying. A witch. The entity seemed to enjoy the title, repeating it with relish in the dead of night. The witch, it would hiss, as though savoring the fear the word carried. The entity occasionally showed signs of unsettling kindness toward Lucy Bell and Lucy alone. It spoke to her gently, told her she was pure of heart, sang to her when she was ill. Friends and neighbors who heard these exchanges shuddered at the contrast. Why would a spirit so full of hatred for John and cruelty toward Betsy show affection to Lucy? The question hung over the household like a curse in itself. But even those small acts of tenderness only deepened the sense of danger. A witch that could hate was horrifying. A witch that could love was far worse. It meant choice. It meant intention. By early spring, the entity's power escalated beyond the confines of the Bell home. Travelers passing along the road claimed to hear disembodied laughter in the trees. Farm animals startled for no reason, bolting as though struck by invisible blows. Some locals swore they saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the Bell property, too tall to be human, too still to be alive. The land itself seemed tainted, as though the soil remembered every whisper, every voice, every threat the entity had ever spoken. And in this growing chaos, the witch's favorite torment target, young Betsy, became the center of a darker obsession. And the voice now spoke to her with a venom reserved for prey, chosen for reasons no human could understand. The family feared that the witch was preparing for something. But what? They would soon find out. By the time spring deepened into summer, the haunting no longer felt like a series of events. It felt like a siege. The Bell family woke, worked, ate, and slept beneath the constant awareness that the witch was watching. The entity had woven itself into their routine so completely that silence became more frightening than noise. When the house was still, they feared what would break that stillness. Knowing the witch would interrupt, mocking each word in a warped imitation of her voice. Then came the dreams. Betsy claimed she saw a woman with hollow eyes standing at the foot of her bed, pointing toward the woods behind the farm. The Bells tried to comfort her, but the entity would only laugh, insisting the girl belonged to it now. John Bell, desperate for answers, sought help from respected figures in the county. Scholars, pastors, and self-proclaimed spiritualists traveled from miles away, mangling wooden chairs, twisting iron tools as though they were made of soft clay. It seemed to take pleasure in proving that no human, regardless of faith or education, could suppress it. One visitor, a well-known minister from a neighboring county, stayed for several days, determined to stand firm. The witch mocked him relentlessly, reciting private sins, exposing secrets he had never spoken aloud. Fear began to isolate the family. Friends who once visited regularly now avoided the property entirely. Some neighbors would not even speak the Bells' names in public. They believed that simply acknowledging the witch could draw its attention. The haunting had become a contagion of terror, something capable of spreading through stories alone. Yet the witch was not finished evolving. They were whispered with such clarity that every hair on John's arms rose. The threat felt different this time, not a taunt, but a prophecy. From that night forward, the witch's attention turned almost entirely toward him. John struggled to speak some mornings, his tongue uncooperative as though numbed by an invisible hand. He grew dizzy without warning, dropping tools, forgetting names, stumbling as if the ground tilted beneath him. It was weakening him, slowly, deliberately. Rumors spread beyond the county lines, drawing curious travelers who arrived eager to witness the phenomenon. Some claimed to hear the witch without ever entering the house. Others arrived skeptically and left pale as moonlight. And now it wanted something more, a final act. Betsy, whose nightmares grew increasingly vivid, sensed the shift before anyone else. One night she confessed, trembling, that the hollow-eyed woman in her dreams no longer pointed to the woods. Now she pointed to her father. The Bell family prayed that the torment would end, but the worst chapter had not yet begun. The witch was only tightening its grip, preparing for the blow it had promised since the very beginning. As summer bled into autumn, the Bell home felt less like a place of refuge and more like a waiting room for judgment. It lingered with the permanence of a carved scar. He woke gasping, clawing at his throat, certain the witch was squeezing the air from his lungs. The doctors who examined him could not explain the sudden decline. Some suggested nerve damage, others whispered strokes. But none could account for the timing, the precision, or the way the witch responded with gleeful laughter whenever John stumbled or collapsed. And Betsy, caught between her own torment and her growing fear for John, felt the witch tightening its influence around her mind. Her nightmares worsened. The witch's behavior grew more theatrical, as if it wanted witnesses. It began performing feats of knowledge for visitors predicting future events, repeating sermons spoken miles away, recounting conversations that had occurred behind locked doors. These displays spread the legend far beyond the Bell farm, each encounter adding fuel to a story that was rapidly outgrowing the county. Some left convinced it was a demon. Others believed it was an oracle. A few believed it was the restless ghost of a woman wronged. Whatever it was, it seemed to thrive under the growing attention, feeding on fear the way fire feeds on dry timber. Meanwhile, John's condition worsened. His vision blurred, his hands shook. And then came the choking fits, violent and sudden, leaving him gasping, while the witch mocked him with cruel, echoing laughter. But the witch's cruelty did not end with physical torment. It began stripping away pieces of John's identity. It mimicked his voice with disturbing accuracy, calling to family members, tricking them into believing he needed help. It recited his private prayers aloud, twisting them into insults. It exposed childhood memories he had never shared. It violated the one thing he believed was untouchable, his inner self. And the more it revealed, the more fragile he became. Lucy, battered by fear but strengthened by love, refused to abandon her husband. One evening, as a heavy rain pounded the farm, John collapsed by the fireplace. His breathing rattled, his skin pale, his eyes dull with exhaustion. The family carried him to his bed, fearing the worst. And as lightning cracked across the sky, the witch spoke in a voice that was neither whisper nor shout, but something far more chilling, calm. Soon he will not rise again. No laughter, only certainty. But the witch was not finished. Later that night, while the family kept vigil, it revealed something that froze every drop of blood in their veins. In a clear, measured voice, the entity promised a final demonstration, one that would prove its power beyond doubt. It claimed it would deliver the blow that would end John Bell's suffering, and when it did, the entire region would learn its name. The Bell Witch was preparing for its final act, had become focused, purposeful, as if every moment had been leading toward what was now unfolding. John Bell, once strong and tireless, was a shadow wrapped in blankets, drifting in and out of consciousness. His breaths were shallow, his voice barely more than a rasp. Lucy tended to John day and night, brushing his hair from his forehead, whispering prayers into the dim glow of lamplight. The witch never harmed her. In fact, it seemed almost protective, speaking gently when addressing her, its tone softening in a way that horrified everyone who heard it. That tenderness only made its hatred for John more grotesque. Betsy, already worn thin by years of torment, began sleepwalking. The hollow-eyed woman no longer appeared in silence. She now spoke in a tone identical to the witches. Others believed they had encountered a divine being. A few claimed it spoke truths about their lives that no human could know. Whether those revelations were real or manipulative illusions, each visitor left convinced of one thing: whatever haunted the Bell family was not of this world. It predicted that John would not live through the winter. It described the moment with eerie detail, even mocking the way his final breath would sound. She demanded the witch explain, and in a tone smooth with satisfaction, the entity revealed the truth. What followed became one of the most widely recounted moments of the legend. John Bell would never wake again. The witch celebrated. It laughed. It repeated the words it had whispered for years, declaring its victory with theatrical triumph. To the Bell family, the moment was not only a tragedy, it was the confirmation of a nightmare come to life. Their tormentor had not merely threatened death. Some came only to witness the aftermath of a haunting that had become regional lore. As the service ended, a chilling voice echoed over the mourners, clear as a bell, mocking the dead man in his grave. Even in death, John found no peace. But the witch's story did not end with him. In the days that followed, its attention shifted once more toward Betsy. The dreams intensified. The woods called to her. And soon she would learn that the witch's plans for her were far from finished. Before we continue into the final, most disturbing chapter of this haunting, make sure you subscribe. And tell me, do you believe the witch truly killed John Bell? Or was something even darker at play? Winter's grip tightened around Red River, yet inside the Bell home, an even colder presence lingered. The family hoped desperately that the witch would fade now that its vengeance was fulfilled. But hope had never protected them. And the witch, if anything, seemed invigorated. Its voice returned stronger, sharper, carrying the smug confidence of something that believed it had proven its dominance. Betsy Bell, now the spirit's primary fixation, could not escape its influence. In the weeks following her father's death, her nightmares evolved from terror to command. The hollow-eyed woman in her dreams no longer pointed silently. She spoke in the witch's voice, urging Betsy toward one inevitable decision. She must break her engagement to Joshua Gardner, the kind young man she had loved for years. Betsy resisted with every ounce of will she had left, clinging to the life she had imagined: marriage, escape, normality, a future untouched by the witch's cruelty. But the entity refused to loosen its grip. Each night, Betsy woke with the taste of soil in her mouth, as if she had been buried alive in her sleep. Each morning, she found new scratches on her skin, thin and deliberate, spelling out warnings she could barely decipher. And whenever she tried to speak to Joshua about her fears, the witch whispered obscenities, mocking him until Betsy shook with humiliation. The spirit seemed determined to sever the bond between them, as though the mere idea of Betsy finding happiness was an insult it could not tolerate. Joshua, for his part, tried valiantly to protect her. He stayed by her side during the worst episodes, holding her trembling hands while the witch hurled invisible blows and shrieked curses no human throat could produce. But the more he defended her, the more violently the entity attacked. One night, after a particularly brutal assault on Betsy, Joshua woke to find deep scratches on his own back marks carved by hands that had never touched him. He realized then that love alone could not fight a force that obeyed no earthly rules. By early spring, Betsy's resistance unraveled. She lost weight rapidly, her eyes hollowing, her voice cracking whenever she spoke. Her teachers noted her confusion, her inability to focus. Friends avoided her, afraid that merely being near her would draw the witch's ire. The world that had once seemed full of possibility contracted into a suffocating circle of dread. Finally, Betsy bowed to the inevitable. She ended her engagement to Joshua Gardner. What happened next confirmed everyone's darkest suspicions. The witch celebrated. Its voice echoed throughout the Bell home, gloating, laughing, congratulating Betsy for obeying its will. And in that moment, she understood a horrifying truth. The spirit had never wanted her dead. It wanted her controlled. It wanted her broken. It wanted her future. But then, just as abruptly as it had arrived, the Bell Witch announced its departure. It spoke one evening in a calm, almost businesslike tone, informing the family it was leaving, but would return in precisely 7 years. And with that, the torment ceased. The house fell silent. Betsy slept through the night for the first time in years. The air lightened, as if a massive weight had been lifted from the land itself. 7 years later, true to its word, the witch returned, but only briefly. It spoke to John Bell, Jr., engaging him in long philosophical discussions about morality, life, and the nature of the unseen. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished again, this time claiming it would not return for over 100 years. Whether it did is a matter of debate. Some claim the witch resurfaced in the early 1900s, terrorizing the area in short bursts before disappearing once more. Others swear the entity never left, only changed form, whispering through the woods of Tennessee, influencing those sensitive enough or unlucky enough to hear it. And some believe the Bell Witch was never a spirit at all, but something older, deeper, a force that attaches itself to certain families, certain land, certain wounds. Yet the most enduring part of the legend is not its violence, but its mystery. A spirit that could sing hymns and deliver prophecies. A presence capable of tenderness and brutality. A force that killed a man without ever touching him, and shattered a young woman's future with nothing more than a whisper in the dark. To this day, visitors to the Bell property report strange sounds in the trees, flickers of movement at the edge of the fields, cold spots where the soil feels disturbed, as if someone is still buried there, still listening. And on windless nights, when the world holds its breath, some claim they hear a voice soft, mocking, and unmistakably familiar calling from the shadows beneath the old foundation.